Well, everybody, in front of me right here, I have the two fastest gaming laptops that we have simply ever tested. They're actually pretty unique too, because instead of all of the Intel that we've been seeing since the dawn of these 2025 laptops, we're finally testing some devices with the AMD Ryzen 9000HX series. So what we have here is the Vector A18HX with the 9955HX and the big boy, the Raider A18HX with the 9955HX 3D. Now these are both very, very rare laptops because what MSI is doing is pretty unique. They're taking the best AMD CPUs on the planet right now for laptops and pairing them up with NVIDIA's top of the line GPUs. Other manufacturers, they're not doing that. And to me, that is a tragedy. Because if you look at the current landscape, most others like ROG and Legion decided to pair AMD's fastest laptop processors with, at most, get this, an RTX 5070 Ti. And in some cases, the 9955HX laptops top out at an RTX 5070. Don't ask me why, and definitely don't ask them, because you'll be met with either silence or truckloads of BS. Either way, and pushing all of that aside, we know that on the desktop side at least, the X3D chips and the Ryzen 9000 series in general is simply head and shoulders above the Intel CPUs when it comes to gaming at least. Now, does that lead translate to the laptop side as well? Well, from a raw performance standpoint, these are a literal copy-paste of the desktop versions, with almost identical multi-core and lightly threaded performance, though with a few minor cutdowns. And that's a huge deal for laptops like these that people expect to be used for heavy gaming and creator workloads. And speaking of expectations, unfortunately, a lot of those expectations are going to be set by the prices of these things. And straight up here, MSI, they basically threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at both of these configurations. And because of that, well, they become, I guess you would call them desktop replacements that actually cost far more than a lot of high-end desktop gaming PCs. The Raider A18HX gets what's essentially the best of the best in the gaming laptop space right now, all for a cool price of $5,600 US. Though if you want to save a bit more than $1,000, there's the RTX 5080 version there too. Meanwhile, think of the Vector A18 series as a slightly detuned version of the Raider. That makes it a solid $500 less than the Raider's base config, though it can also be optioned down to an RTX 5070 Ti, 32 gigs of memory and a 1TB SSD for about $3,000. But look, admittedly, pricing these days, it's all over the frickin' place, right? So just as we were about to record this video, I noticed that Best Buy in the US had the RTX 5080 version of the Vector for the exact same price that we were quoted MSRP for the RTX 5070 Ti version. So you really have to watch out before you pull the trigger. But you know what you should pull the trigger on? That's this case from Thermaltake.
In the vastness of nature, every color tells a story. Matcha green, the color of renewal and fresh beginnings. I mean, take a hint. Hydrangea blue, the hue of tranquility and quiet reflections on how easy it is to work in. Snow white, the essence of purity and crisp air, and having all the hair after the assembly. And black, the depth of mystery shadows, but no mystery to hardware compatibility. This isn't just a stunning ITX enclosure, it's a vibe to shape your mood. The TR100 by Thermaltake. Check it out below.
Anyways, there's two things we all want to know about these laptops. Number one, after being fed a constant diet of Intel CPUs in laptops the last couple of months, how good are AMD's 2025 CPUs in these devices? Number two, if they are all that they're cracked up to be, especially that X3D chip, were we actually seeing the RTX 5090 and the 5080 being held back by those Intel CPUs? So I guess let's start off with gaming. And the comparative lineup we have here should make this a pretty fair fight, with the MSI Raider feeding its RTX 5090 with about as much power as the Legion 9i and Scar 18. Meanwhile, the Vector's RTX 5080 gets exactly the same amount of juice as the one in the ROG Scar 16. We're also adding the ROG Scar 17 X3D as a representation of what a previous generation X3D laptop could achieve with a full-speed RTX 4090. So let's start with the best possible news for AMD fans. In games that are particularly CPU sensitive, the 9955HX3D is an absolute beast. Even at a resolution of 1600p and high details, the RTX 5090's frame rates can be pushed 10, 15, and sometimes even 20% higher than the fastest Intel-based laptop we've tested up to this point. The Vector 18 with its non-X3D chip comes in along for the ride too, with it showing performance that can actually beat or at least match some RTX 5090 based laptops, which is freaking incredible. This has also got to be a pretty big concern for the Intel NVIDIA duopoly in the laptop space. Maybe, just maybe, this is why we don't see many of these Ryzen 9000 HX CPUs in the wild. And of course, there are also areas where we're reaching GPU limits too, especially on the RTX 5090. But even in these games, we're still seeing the Raider HX beating every other laptop over and over again, with the only exception being the Legion 9i. And in most cases, it even ties that one too. That means overall, at least up to today, the 9955 HX 3D seems to have allowed MSI to create what's overall the fastest gaming laptop on the planet, bumping things up to 4K, and we've clearly smashed face first into a GPU bottleneck for the RTX 5090. Other than a few minor variances here and there that can be chalked up to margin of error, the Raider A18, Legion 9i, and Scar 18 are all basically tied, but there's still a few games where the 9955 HX 3D allows for slightly better 1% lows, but at this resolution, those situations are simply few and far between. So what this shows is that in 2025, this is pretty much as good as it gets. It doesn't matter if your preference is an AMD or Intel based laptop, provided the RTX 5090 is running near its peak power, frame rates will be essentially identical regardless of the brand. Meanwhile, the Vector A18's numbers fall into basically the same category. This is as good as it gets for the RTX 5080. I mean, there's a few wins here and there, but most of them fall into the too close to call category between this laptop and the Scar 16. Moving on to workloads outside of gaming, and in Cinebench R24, the two MSIs do well, but they're still essentially tied with the Ultra 9 275 HX systems, despite using about the same amount or less power. So from a performance per watt standpoint, things are looking pretty good for AMD. On the other hand, performance is a bit behind in single core workloads, but not in any meaningful way. And yet move outside those synthetic situations, and the 9955 HX series 36 processing threads can really start to shine on both of these MSI laptops. I mean, make no mistake about it. The 275 HX puts up a good fight, but it's in an uphill battle. Still, Ryzen processors do seem to struggle a bit in our handbrake test for whatever reason. There are some real standouts here too for the MSI laptops, like Photoshop that's a mixed usage scenario which engages with more processing threads alongside the memory and storage subsystems. Lightroom, on the other hand, absolutely loves fast storage, so the Gen 5 SSD and MSI's Raider A18 HX starts paying dividends. Honestly, if you use this program on a daily basis, get the fastest storage you can and it'll save you a ton of time. Moving on to GPU accelerated creator workloads, and anything that puts full emphasis on the GPU cores or media engine will essentially become a tie between identical GPU types, and that's exactly what we see here. The same thing goes for Premiere, though in this instance we're also hitting the SSD with a huge amount of data, so that factors into the equation too. Meanwhile, Resolve is a largely GPU focused render with a bit of CPU involvement, and the MSIs both get very good results here. I mean, they better, given their absolutely insane prices. So what we have here evidently are two very, very fast gaming laptops that can perfectly pull double duty as creator devices too. But let's not lose track of where we are here. These are laptops that need to do laptop things good too, and that includes keeping quiet when you want to maybe lug one of these to a coffee shop or to class. And unfortunately, when web browsing at least, the Raider and Vector are anything but well behaved, even in their out-of-box power mode. Their fans constantly ramp up and down while being hit with a mixed browsing and streaming workload. It becomes so distracting to the point where I would never ever bring one of these into a public space. Things improve a bit in gaming, but the Raider A18 is still one of the loudest laptops here, getting beaten by its closest rival, the Scar 18, by a massive 4 decibels. Luckily, the Vector does a lot better, which is likely due to its lower wattage RTX 5080. And while the Raider might be the loudest one here, it's ironically a middle of the pack performer when it comes to GPU temperature. And that's disappointing since other 18-inch laptops like the Legion 9i and Scar 18 get better temperatures with much less drama. Running an all-core workload shows almost the same thing as gaming. While other devices generally got a little bit quieter during this test than while gaming, both MSI laptops pretty much maintained their noise levels. Meanwhile, CPU temperatures aren't all that great either, considering how loud the fans are running under a full core workload. But we also have to take into account both of these laptops keep their 145 watt CPUs well under AMD's 100-degree maximum. And the ironic thing here is that when you actually peek inside of these things, at first glance it looks like MSI has maximized their cooling setup. But when you dig a little bit deeper, that's maybe why we're seeing a little bit elevated temperatures and a very, very noisy overall setup. Cut. All right. Literally, as I'm doing this, the Raider in idle mode ramps up its fans. Here, listen to this. Like, why? Why? For all intents and purposes, both the Vector and Raider have an identical setup with 5 primary heat pipes snaking their way from the CPU and GPU locations towards micro fin arrays clustered on the back and sides. There's also a secondary heat pipe and contact plate over the storage area, which allows for heat transfer between the SSDs and the main cooling setup. Overall, this thing might look, I guess, pretty beefy, but it's actually an older approach to laptop cooling. Many competitors like Legion and ROG have transitioned to vapor chambers and sometimes triple fan setups for their high-end laptops, whereas MSI has stuck with something a lot more traditional. This whole thing also makes upgrading a little bit more challenging too, and it's not like MSI has gone out of their way to make getting into these things easy to begin with. This is nothing like the ROG team has done with their simple slide to open mechanism that puts the upgrader first rather than, I guess, Fort Knoxing your device like these things have. First of all, you need to remove a solid dozen screws and then use a plastic wedge tool to pry the lower case off of the chassis. And good luck not breaking any of the plastic retention arms here. If you want to access the memory, you'll need to gently wiggle off the metal cover, which is simple, but getting it reseated back into its retention arms is a bit more frustrating. Getting at those SSDs though, well, it's a pain in the ass. I mean, I get it. Gen 5 SSDs need lots of cooling, and removing 5 screws isn't the end of the world, but you'll need to have some extra thermal pads on hand since the one MSI installs are very, very sticky, and some are bound to tear as the contact plate is removed. And I guess that brings me to the differences between the Raider and the Vector. And look, these are essentially the same device, and unfortunately, if you have any preconceptions or stereotypes about gaming laptops, be they thick, heavy, or whatever, these things are going to check almost every single one of those negative boxes. Like battery life. Look, the Vector is okay, at least in this particular test, but it still doesn't have enough juice to get you through even a full day, even when just browsing the web. The Raider, on the other hand, with its X3D chip, well, it had some of the worst numbers we've ever seen in the last half decade of laptop testing. I'd even hazard to go back maybe a decade in our laptop reviews and struggle to find a laptop that did this poorly in this test. Like, so bad, with the Vector joining in on the parade during our streaming video testing, that we reached out to MSI thinking there was a problem of some sort. But nope, according to them, this is expected behavior, even in balanced mode, since they aren't shunting any power away from the CPU when the system detects that it's running on battery, even in an idle state. Instead, their intent is to deliver the best possible performance at an instant's notice, even if somebody is running on battery. Luckily, some of the RTX 5080's built-in efficiency shows itself in gaming, and the Vector is able to surge ahead of everything else here, but the Raider is still well behind other RTX 5090 equipped 18-inch laptops. And here is the height of irony, guys. Despite MSI saying battery life was supposedly sacrificed for performance while on battery, these laptops really don't do all that well when unplugged. Like here in Handbrake, they're okay when running off the mains, but then just fall apart when the battery kicks in, becoming some of the slowest devices here. And Cinebench, well, that's the same thing. Respectable results just get hammered downwards when they aren't hooked up to their chargers like some oversized IV bags. It doesn't really get all that much better in Photoshop either. While the Vector and Raider initially got class-leading performance on battery, some other devices like the Scar 16 and 18 are almost able to close that gap. MSI's claims about maintaining performance on battery also get thrown out the window in, yes, gaming. These are some of the fastest laptops in Cyberpunk, but try to game on the go, on battery, and you can just forget about it. And look, this is an area where the RTX 5000 series GPUs have historically been very, very good, but not this time. And speaking of negative stereotypes, look, like I said before, these things are big, heavy, and they come with absolutely titanic power bricks. So a laptop is supposed to be portable, right? But these things are anything but. You can essentially forget about ever fitting them into most laptop backpacks. And since battery life is so terrible, you'll be carting around the 3.5 pound charger, which by itself weighs more than most thin and light laptops, pushing both the Vector and the Raider to well over 11 pounds. And all of that weight budget, well, unfortunately, has not been spent on the exterior materials because both of these have a fully plastic design, though the build quality is relatively good overall. There's very little flex around the keyboard area, and you can easily open the massive screen with a single finger. Ports are about par for the course for high-end 2025 laptops without any nasty surprises, though I really have to wonder why MSI didn't make all of the USB-A ports at least Gen 2 compatible. It's also nice to see a little nod to the desktop replacement mantra with rear-mounted HDMI and LAN connectors, but again, there aren't any differences between the Vector and the Raider series here. So what are the actual differences? Well, from the outside, there's a few slight visual changes, like the Raider getting an RGB strip that looks like little more than an afterthought, which, by the way, I'm totally okay with, red accents, and a dark color scheme on its lid. Unfortunately, that makes it a fingerprint magnet, and it picks up scratches by just looking at it. Ironically, the cheaper Vector's lid seems to be a whole lot more durable. There's also some differences in the keyboards, with the Raider getting one designed by SteelSeries, though they're both equally terrible, with shallow key travel, very little tactile feedback, and an overall lifeless typing experience. Honestly, with all of the progression that we have seen in laptop keyboards over the last half decade, these feel like they were designed and implemented on a 2010 device, and they simply haven't changed since then. And unfortunately, the trackpads, well, they might be even worse, though I would hazard to guess that most people are probably going to be using an external mouse with these things. Look, I happen to like their smaller size since it prevents the crappy palm detection in Windows from throwing a literal hissy fit every few minutes. But other than that, at random times, they take half a second or more to register a touch, and the integrated left and right buttons need far too much pressure to register a press. We need to talk about the screens a bit too, because it's another area where the more expensive Raider ends up being overall just disappointing. On paper at least, it has everything you'd possibly want. Meanwhile, the panel on the Vectors isn't a slouch either. Both deliver on their color gamut promises without any problem whatsoever, but that's where my praise it stops. Not only is that mini LED panel one of the dimmest I've come across when you aren't using HDR, but panel uniformity, it completely falls off a cliff, with there being a noticeably darker part of the screen at full brightness. Meanwhile, that regular IPS panel on the Vector, it's a whole lot better. And it gets worse too, because that mini LED throws color accuracy just out the window by oversaturating every single color in every one of the preset modes we tried. Meanwhile, its cheaper brother has almost pinpoint accuracy. Honestly, I don't know if this boils down to a lack of quality control or these being early production units or what, but I was simply shocked by how poorly the Raider screen did in our testing. Don't let the mini LED marketing hype fool you in any way, guys. This thing has no place making its way onto a $5,000 flagship gaming laptop. These are two amazing devices for the internals that they offer you. The Ryzen 9000 series paired up with the RTX 5080 or the 5090 is oh so good. But ultimately, both of these devices fail at their primary task, and that is simply being a good laptop. Look, they aren't portable by any stretch of the imagination. They're loud and run hot. Battery life is just laughable. The keyboards feel like they were from 2010. The list goes on. And if you're using these things as a desktop replacement, so plugged in all the time with an external monitor, well, at that point, you need to ask yourself very seriously, why aren't you on a desktop? You can buy a complete desktop PC with a 5090, a really good monitor, and a whole kit of peripherals, and still have money left over to buy an ultra portable laptop. And I get it, that's the age-old debate and not necessarily one that I want to have in this video, though I'm sure that the comment section down below is going to be on fire at some point. But look, if you're spending this much money on a laptop that will ultimately be tied to its charger at your desk, that conversation, at least internally, with yourself at least, it really needs to happen before plunking down the money that these things are asking for. With that being said, I need to give MSI some major credit for being one of the only laptop manufacturers who are actually pairing the best Ryzen laptop CPUs with NVIDIA's fastest GPUs. And that combination is, yes, it's incredible. Though I found myself trying to make sense of why MSI didn't add an X3D turbo mode like all of their motherboards have, which could have maybe improved gaming frame rates even more. I'll also give the Vector the benefit of the doubt here too, since it's more than $2,000 cheaper than the Raider, and it also gets very, very strong results, even against RTX 5090 based laptops. So there's definitely a value proposition for this, at least in the high-end laptop lineup. And look, make no mistake about it, the Raider and the Vector with their AMD CPUs are technological achievements, at least internally. They provide you some insane numbers. And look, I can name off the top of my head probably a half dozen different creator and professional fields where they will absolutely fit into the equation very, very well. Unfortunately, when it comes to their primary goal, and that is to provide a portable device for both gaming and probably just taking it with you to class or the coffee shop, that's where they really fail, and I can't recommend them because, like I said so many times in this video, there are laptops that fail at being laptops. Anyways, I'm Mike with Hardware Canucks. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great day, guys.